The Comanche Nation was once the dominant force in America, renowned for their unmatched military prowess. They successfully repelled many adversaries until their eventual defeat in the late 1800s. Discover the hidden history of the Comanche, one of the most formidable Native American tribes to ever exist. By the 1870s, the Comanches were nearing their collapse due to persistent pressure from US forces. Several factors contributed to this shift after decades of resistance. The brutal Civil War had provided the US with a battle-hardened and modern military force, while the government's systematic destruction of the Native Americans' primary food source, buffalo, further weakened their ability to fight. President Ulysses S. Grant's resolve to end Comanche dominance played a pivotal role in their eventual defeat. However, there was another significant factor: disease. As the Comanches interacted more with settlers and traded, they were exposed to European diseases like smallpox and cholera. Lacking immunity, the Comanche population was decimated. Two major epidemics in 1816 and 1849 had already halved their numbers. Interestingly, the Quahati Band, led by Quanapaka, was one of the last to stand strong. This group had deliberately avoided peaceful contact with settlers, which also meant they had avoided the plagues that ravaged other Comanche bands. As a result, the Quahati were one of the few bands still capable of resisting the US expansion into Comanche territory by the 1870s, making them a formidable force for the final battles. The Comanche Nation's shift from peaceful hunter-gatherers to a dominant military force was both dramatic and complete. Once they mastered horsemanship in the late 17th century, their entire society became centered around warfare. This intense focus on battle shaped nearly every aspect of their culture, leaving little room for other pursuits. The Comanche lacked complex social structures, religious institutions, or any significant artistic expression. Instead, children were trained from a young age in the essential skills of riding, hunting, and fighting, preparing them for a life focused solely on combat. In many ways, the Comanche society resembled that of the Spartans, where martial prowess was paramount. Their transformation into fierce warriors made them nearly unstoppable. Comanche raids struck terror into all who encountered them, with brutal tactics that left little mercy. In battle, no male enemies survived, regardless of surrender, and older children were often killed, while young ones were taken captive. Women were subjected to horrific violence, and the destruction left in their wake was total. The Comanches waged a form of total warfare long before such a concept was officially defined, and their relentless aggression made them one of the most formidable military forces in North American history. A surprising aspect of US history is how the lengthy conflict between the Comanches and the United States is often overlooked or not referred to as a war. However, the Comanches waged a relentless campaign against Texas that spanned almost 4 decades, demonstrating their resilience and military prowess.
Got him on the run.
Don't be too sure. Looks like an old Indian trick to me.
The conflict with the Comanches began during the Spanish rule of Texas, continued through its time as an independent republic, and persisted even after it became part of the United States. To protect settlers, the Texas Rangers were formed, adopting the Comanches' brutal total war tactics. For many years, Texas struggled to contain the Comanches, who even expanded into Texan territory multiple times. It wasn't until Texas joined the Union and President Ulysses S. Grant prioritized their defeat that the tide began to turn. This led to a series of military campaigns that eventually culminated in the Comanches' defeat in the 1870s. The Comanche Nation's rise to prominence in the 19th century defied the expectations of many, as their early history was far from the image of fierce warriors on horseback. Initially, the Comanche were nomadic hunter-gatherers who followed seasonal migrations of prey, lagging behind other Native American groups. Unlike the advanced civilizations of the Aztecs or the Iroquois, the Comanche had no permanent settlements or grand structures and were not particularly known for their aggression or warrior culture. However, everything changed when they encountered horses in the late 17th century, introduced by the Spanish. The Comanche quickly learned to master these powerful animals, a skill that transformed them into exceptional riders and fighters. They became experts in breeding, training, and utilizing horses in combat, and this newfound ability enabled them to conquer and dominate vast territories. By the 18th century, the Comanche had evolved into one of the most formidable forces in North America, commanding respect and fear as one of the most powerful Native American empires, with a warrior culture centered around their unparalleled skill in horsemanship.
instead of sedentary tribes who were agricultural from the east, you had nomadic tribes who were mounted in the west, and it changed everything.
The Comancheria, a vast territory controlled by the Comanches, expanded rapidly as the tribe transformed into a formidable war machine. Once they mastered the horse, their society became solely focused on warfare, and they began their ascent as the Lords of the Plains. Over 150 years, the Comanches relentlessly pushed out rival tribes, gradually conquering vast stretches of land and dominating anyone they didn't destroy. By the 1820s, when Americans began venturing westward, the Comancheria had grown to cover an astounding 250,000 square miles, spanning across what would become Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. The Comanches also held sway over around 20 other tribes, who acknowledged their superiority. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen argues that the Comancheria was not just a tribal domain, it was an empire. They didn't just conquer land, they absorbed different cultures, imposed their own political and military systems, and acted as a unified entity in negotiations. The Comanche Empire, at its height, rivaled many European empires in power and sophistication. This immense strength is why the Spanish, French, and American colonization efforts stalled when they encountered the Comancheria. The Comanches' military prowess and organizational structure made them one of the most formidable forces in North America. In 1836, Comanche raiders kidnapped Cynthia Ann Parker, who was eventually integrated into the tribe. She married a Comanche warrior and had a son, Quanah Parker, in 1852. By the time Quanah grew into adulthood, the Comanche Nation was nearing its end, and he emerged as its final leader. Known for his fierce bravery, Quanah quickly became a respected warrior. At just 19 years old, he led violent raids against American forces in 1871. In 1874, he gathered 300 warriors to launch one final attack against the advancing American troops threatening the Comancheria. Quanah Parker's final attempt to drive the Americans away unfolded at Adobe Walls, where around 28 hunters had taken refuge. The Comanches launched an assault, but instead of achieving a decisive victory, they found themselves locked in a prolonged battle. The siege lasted 5 days, ultimately ending in a retreat for the Native Americans. Despite the setback, the Comanches continued their raids, but American forces retaliated by destroying their supplies and killing their horses. This crippling blow led Quanah to surrender, and he agreed to relocate his remaining warriors to a reservation. Though the Comanche Nation had been broken, Quanah proved to be an effective and respected leader in peacetime, guiding his people with wisdom as they adapted to a new way of life. He spent the rest of his life dedicated to his tribe, ensuring their well-being within the confines of the reservation. At the height of their power, the Comanches nearly decimated several Native American tribes, demonstrating their unrivaled dominance in the region. The tribes resisting U.S. expansion into the Midwest weren't unified. They were a collection of diverse nations with shared traditions. However, the Comanches stood apart, using their military prowess to wage aggressive campaigns against their fellow Native Americans. Their relentless attacks pushed other tribes off the Central Plains, forcing them to relocate. One of the most significant impacts was on the Apache Nation, which came close to annihilation. The Comanches fought fiercely, decimating the Apaches in a series of brutal conflicts. As a result, many Apache groups were forced to seek protection from the Spanish, and some tribes disappeared altogether. But the Comanches' aggression wasn't limited to the Apaches. They inflicted considerable damage on tribes like the Pawnees, Osages, Blackfeet, Kiowas, and Tonkawas. These tribes were driven from their ancestral lands, and thousands of lives were lost in the process. By the mid-1700s, the Comanches controlled the vast expanse of the plains, and their influence was so feared that neighboring tribes respected their borders. The Comanches' ruthless military campaigns reshaped the landscape of Native American power, solidifying their status as one of the most formidable forces in North America.